Everyone, it is... I actually don't know exactly what episode number it is. I think it's 122, but I'm not positive because it's been a while since I've edited them, because it's taken us a little bit to get going on this particular episode because we had to watch a lot of a classic TV show, but it is the Demons from Outer Space. Dylan McCandless, Super DM64, is joining me, Bill Worster, Zazubaar. Dylan, say that you're here just so they don't think I'm talking to myself.
I am here, yes, and this is episode 122 for Bill's information.
Ah, look at that. My not-so-educated guesses turn out to be right. It's my whole academic career for you right there. So, what are we talking about on tonight's episode that took one of us a little longer to get through than the other one?
Yes, so we're gonna talk some classic Who tonight.
As
because
we
Bill's
promised.
Bill's back into Who hardcore since I finally talked him into watching season 10, and I've never stopped being into Who hardcore. And so here we are. We're gonna talk about some Who, some classic Who, the most classic of Who.
Well, the classicest of all Who.
Yes, the very first. Let's see.
First two.
11 half hours of television that are the first two Doctor Who serials.
Yes.
The Unearthly Child / Cavemen story, and then the very first appearance by the Daleks. So that's where we are. Where do you want to begin, Bill?
Well, I mean, at the beginning, where all great stories begin. Although the Doctor would travel to the fourth episode, and then he would well, this is our starting point, and then he would stand around for a while, and then he would inevitably find his way back to the start and be like, "I intended this the whole time, my child." Well, why don't we do a little bit overview, obviously, since this is, not a small thing to cover. Classic Doctor Who has a certain amount of stigma in the sense that if you really like new Doctor Who, but you haven't seen much classic Doctor Who, you'd better not say that around hardcore Doctor Who fans, otherwise they'll fucking kick you in the ass, both metaphorically and physically. And I was that way for a very long time. When I first got into it, I watched a little bit of classic Doctor Who. I watched Pyramid of Mars and a little bit of Pertwee stuff, but that was about it. I watched the Three Doctors and a few other things, but I didn't get super hardcore into it because it wasn't the show that I had really gotten into, and I don't even think at that point I had finished New Who, so I that was kind of where I was at with it. But recently, when I got back into Doctor Who because of Season 10 and enjoying it as much as I did and realizing, oh shit, I like this again, I wanted to go back to classic Doctor Who and sort of refamiliarize myself with the roots of the show that I wasn't nearly familiar enough with. And I hadn't even seen stories from each Doctor. Although I think I have actually watched bits and pieces of An Unearthly Child and the first Dalek story before. And I also have seen both the Peter Cushing Doctor Who Dalek movies that Terry Nation made separate from the BBC in America. I think those were made... maybe they weren't made in America, but they were made separate from the BBC. And
yes.
And they are both direct remakes, beat for beat remakes of the first Dalek story we're going to be talking about tonight, just called The Daleks, and then the second one, The Dalek Invasion of Earth, which I also have seen now. I watched that today, actually, or finished it today. That's that's about as long. I think that's actually a little shorter than this one, than the first Dalek story. But they're both still meatier Who stories. Typically in classic Who, your longest stories are 6 parts, but the first Dalek one I think is 7 or 8. The
it's
one
7.
It's 7, yeah, and then I think the second one is the proper 6 that most classic Doctor Who doesn't go past. I think the only one that does is the Trial of the Time Lord, which is 12, right?
Yeah. Well, it's the entire second season of Colin Baker, which I think 12 parts. Yeah, just was Trial of the Time Lord. That's all he did.
Right.
For that year. So that was a huge story. I don't think anything's ever beaten that or is liable to ever do in terms of just sheer girth.
Right. Maybe never should. I haven't seen it yet, but, still. So, point being, classic Doctor Who has stigma attached to it, and for that reason, it's something that I think we really should have talked about sooner, at least in more detail. But we've both kind of agreed upon a starting point, and we've both watched a certain amount of it, so we have some ground to cover. And more than that, I never watched a full Hartnell serial until sitting down to do it for this podcast, and then I've watched several thereafter because of my experience with these first two. So, with that said, what I want to ask you right up front is, I guess, I mean, for you, I imagine this question won't have as much of a difference, but I mean, what was your perception of Hartnell, I guess, before you sat down and watched these two serials for this podcast, and how was it maybe changed, or did it change after?
Well, I mean, when I first got into Doctor Who back in 2008 or 9, whatever year it was, New Who, obviously I didn't have access to pretty much any classic Who, and so I learned about all of it through tons of research online and just reading anything I could find about, what happened in classic Who. And so I already had a pretty good idea of what his character was like. I'd already read all about how he was the sort of, he was a grumpy old man to start off with, and it takes a long time for him to develop from that into what we know now. I mean, that can be said for the entire show. Watching a Hartnell episode is nothing like watching, a modern episode of Doctor Who,
or even like Pertwee or Baker, even late Troughton. It feels like a completely different thing. It very quickly, not very quickly, I guess, but it gets there. Like, Hartnell does fill the role, and also the formula and the feel of it does get to where you're like, okay, yeah, this is Doctor Who. And it's not like an Unearthly Child and the first Dalek story doesn't feel anything like every other Doctor Who story ever, and it doesn't have that feel, because every other Doctor Who story is, in a sense, calling back to these first two, because these first two do sort of the two major Who concepts you can do: going back in time on Earth and going into the far future on a distant planet.
Yeah, although it's a little different from the way they do it now, and we'll talk about that when we start discussing the episode.
Yeah, it is very different. The actual narrative of why they're traveling and the actual relationship between the Doctor and the companions is very different from anything in traditional Who. I'm not even going to say New Who, because like once you get to Baker, like, it's pretty much the same as it is now, just without as much sex.
Yeah, which also the early on, Doctor Who was meant to be kind of educational, and so whenever the Doctor and his people would travel back in time just to a destination, it was always usually just like a straight historical piece. There were no like aliens who were secretly like plotting to take over Venice or whatever, and so at some point the idea of blending the historical piece with the alien stuff came about. But early on, those are two separate kinds of episodes. And now, we don't even get straight-up historical episodes of Doctor Who anymore. They haven't done one of those since, I think the last one was like in the 70s or something. Or maybe even, probably in the 70s.
I've seen most of Baker's, or at least most of Baker's stuff. I cannot even think of one where it was straight-up just historical. Like, all the ones that I'm remembering, there was an alien plot. Like the Mask of Mandragora, there was an alien consciousness communicating with an astrologer in like Renaissance era Italy.
That's they don't do it anymore, and that's a shame.
They haven't done it since, like you said, like probably since maybe Pertwee had done one.
I would really like. Probably won't happen, but if I had my way, I would love it if Chibnall was like, no, we're going to do like a straight up historical episode.
I mean, you'd have to do it in a way where like there's a reason for it and it's not boring, because the potential for it to be boring is obviously a lot higher than any other kind of Who story, because you don't have that kind of instant like, oh, the Doctor has something that's going to be able to, challenge him. Because just people on Earth without the right situation, the Doctor should just be able to kind of talk his way out of anything. But you have to put him in a situation where that's not going to happen. And early on, Hartnell wasn't really, like, into that sort of thing anyway. He didn't really feel like he had to talk to anybody. He was just so stubborn and stalwart in his ways. But
Yeah. So, like I was saying, Hartnell starts out as a grumpy old man, and he softens up over the course of his run until eventually we regenerate into Trouton, and then we become a lot more clownish. But he starts off being very serious and sort of a straight character, and really kind of a dick, which is
oh
great.
yeah,
He's basically what New Who tried to do with Peter Capaldi, but couldn't get away with because people are too used to the way they perceive the Doctor now. They were trying to go back to like a Hartnell type of like grouchy old man character,
they
and
weren't being fully genuine with it. That was that was their problem. They didn't they didn't make it work naturally, and they had every fucking way to do it because of how Smith's run ended. Like it was a perfect fucking time to have an older Doctor come in and be grumpy. It worked very well in the beginning.
I think that's definitely part of it, but what I'm saying is I don't think that's entirely up to their execution. I think there was also an element of fan backlash.
People just didn't accept it. Yeah, I mean, and I were like very into that at first.
I mean, the viewership dipped considerably when they brought in Capaldi anyway, because suddenly we didn't have the teenage girls who want to fuck the Doctor audience.
I mean, there's still a little bit of that because teenage girls have weird tastes, but.
But I don't mean to turn this into another fucking conversation about what went wrong with Capaldi's era. The point is, he's all grumpy to start off with, and actually, it was gonna be worse. Like, have you seen the unused pilot?
No.
Okay, so apparently this isn't on BritBox. On the DVD that I have, Doctor Who: The Beginning. If you're interested in watching these episodes, I'd highly recommend going and checking it out. It's got these two stories as well as the third story, Edge of Destruction, which is super short.
Or just like pay $7 and get BritBox and have access to all of classic Doctor Who that isn't lost.
Oh, but then you won't have the special features, and you won't have the unused pilot. So basically, it's the same script as Unearthly Child, for the most part, but the Doctor is even more of like a grouchy dickhead.
How much more? Because as it is, he locks them in the TARDIS and like basically kidnaps them. I mean, he accidentally kidnaps them. But he still kidnaps them.
Yeah, okay. Think about that, and then consider that they changed it because they felt that he was too unlikable in the pilot.
Right, so it's just his behavior around that.
He's just a nastier individual than he is in the pilot.
Right, because he's sort of charming in his way that he tries to put off Ian and Barbara, like in the Junk Hero. Like that is. You know, I think because I'd never seen an Unearthly Child prior to this. When I watched it, I was very surprised at how much of his performance is very similar, if not the same, as every Doctor thereafter. Because they all are taking elements of him and doing their own thing with those certain elements. There are certain things, though, that are inherently the Doctor. The cadence in which not the cadence in which he speaks, but like the certain way that he talks circles around people and comes off as crazy, but always 10 steps ahead of you. Those things are the things that we see in every interpretation, whether they be comical, serious, dark, or, any variation of the Doctor we've had. And I think that that's very iconic and makes these hold up a lot better than maybe you might expect them to. Because you get to see the unfiltered beginning of that. Because we're not seeing Hartnell do his thing with the Doctor. We're seeing Hartnell create this character out of nothing. And that is it's beautiful, and it feels natural in a way that no other Doctor could do. They all have their own positive and negative elements to their different arcs. But Hartnell's, everything just kind of comes together to be his era. And to be the development of his Doctor. There are things that I don't like. We'll talk about it. But it's so iconic that these are almost impossible to critique. Because it's oh, well, yeah, sure, you could see the people's heads in the grates of the Dalek suits, but it's an early '60s sci-fi serial. That's what they were there for, to be able to see the flaw, to be able to see the chinks in the armor. And
they were made for they made 4 Daleks on a budget of 250 pounds.
Yeah.
which is it's not a bad amount of money in Britain in 1963, but still, I mean, we're talking TV here,
Yeah.
you know.
And a
I,
show that did not do well initially.
I mean, think about how wonky the effects are sometimes in like original series Star Trek, and then consider the fact that a British TV budget at the time would be even lower,
Yeah.
you know. Uh,
More than that,
but if you remember in Adventure in Space and Time,
right, I was
they
going to
kind
say
of
that watching that before seeing this in full was weird.
they touched on the whole unused pilot thing. They filmed a version of the episode, and then everybody was Sidney Newman in particular was like, "He's too mean. We need to make him more likable," which is hilarious because he was the one who was pushing for the whole,
Right.
you know, grouchy guy to begin with.
And Hartnell was
Uh,
the one who was like, "Can't we make me more likable, please? I'm sick of being a mean old man." And I think the arc that David Bradley was characterizing him going through in An Adventure in Space and Time gives you more of an appreciation for the Doctor's arc early on of accepting Ian and Barbara and accepting just other people and not being suspicious and feeling superior to everybody, which is the character we get early on. Do you agree that it feels natural, or do you think it feels forced?
What's that? The arc in
The arc
Adventure in Space?
No, I'm talking about the actual Doctor becoming more of a softened character. You know, he starts starts mean and then gets nicer.
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, we see the beginnings of it over the course of these two episodes.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it works so well. It doesn't feel like, oh shit, we're panicking, you know?
Yeah, it's not like he's like a dickhead in one episode and then does a complete 180 turn in the next episode either. This is gradual as fuck, frustratingly gradual at times. You know.
Yeah, and again, they're building Doctor Who from the ground up. I think. Well, let me say one last thing about Hartnell. He's still really fun to watch, though. Like, it's not like he's boring, which I think is the perception that a lot of New Who fans have of him. Like, he's far from boring. He's so fiery and filled with life and anger and joy as well. Like, you see more of it obviously later on, but he's so like he can be so giddy and cheerful, kind of childlike, despite his age. And it's interesting that it's after Susan leaves most of it. I think that there's a reason for that, and that was another really natural element of his arc that they worked in. But
and it's funny that they tried to duplicate it and failed with Capaldi, because they actually did duplicate it and succeed. You know, with Eccleston back in season 1, Eccleston starts off as a real dickhead.
He's not it's different though. He's not so much. He's not.
It's not
so
like
much,
a crotchety. It's not like a crotch. It's not in like a crotchety old man way.
He's
But
just.
it's in like a very.
He's very cynical.
Very angry.
I'll give you that. He's definitely a cynical Doctor. But he's not. He's almost like, he reminds me like of the practical, sarcastic guy you hang out with, where you guys will all fuck up, and then he'll be like, "All right, here's what we need to do to make this work," and you're like, "Oh yeah, right." Like, that's his Doctor. You know, Tennant's is the one who fucks up everything, and Smith is also that, but he's not. Eccleston's definitely not the crotchety old man. The crotchety old man thing is so iconic with Hartnell, you know? Because we're also dealing with a Doctor who hasn't regenerated yet. So there isn't that element of, like, I've been other people yet. He's like, this is the raw Doctor, you know?
So much has yet to be established. I mean...
So I want to talk about the next big part of that then. The TARDIS.
Like, at times, when you watch Who nowadays, it's like, we know so much about this guy that you have to question how relevant the title is. You go back to these episodes, who the fuck is he? Like,
right, well, I mean, we don't know what planet he comes from. We don't, I mean, to be fair, in New Who, if you when I watched that from the beginning, they reveal things kind of slow. Like, I don't think you find out about Gallifrey and the Time Lords until the end of episode 2.
I don't even think they told you what they were called until, like...
Well, yeah, in Classic Who, I mean, they didn't even establish Time Lords or Gallifrey, maybe even until Pertwee's era. mean,
I know War Games is the first time I think we actually see them when they, force Troughton to regenerate into Pertwee, but I'm not even sure. I can't even remember when like Time Lord became the actual name.
I don't think they said Time Lord. I think they just were like, we're the Doctor's people.
Yeah. It's so gradual the way all this developed.
Yeah, well, I think they were scared. I think they wanted him to be... I mean, they obviously wanted him to be this mysterious H.G. Wells time traveler type, you know?
Yeah.
They don't... I mean, again... They didn't want him to be this guy who, he's never really the true protagonist of his own series. Like, we always have to see him through somebody else's eyes. Like, that's the interesting thing about the Doctor, because he's such this larger-than-life figure. You know?
Yeah.
And I think that we see that the most with this, because Ian and Barbara, it feels like their show at the beginning, and it's a gradual shift to when you even realize that the Doctor is like the main character.
Yeah. Well, remember, this is interesting, and this is actually a brilliant little bit of setup that they did that I didn't even think about until watching it again this time around. Like I said, originally Doctor Who was meant to be, partially, educational. It was supposed to be entertaining, but also educational, edutainment or whatever you want to call it. And the two subjects that they wanted to teach the audience of kids watching at home a little bit about were like science and history. And what are the subjects that Ian and Barbara teach at Coal Hill School? Science and history. Like
right.
They are into those two things. And then you have Susan, his granddaughter, who is literally one of their pupils,
Right. The idea of teaching is the forefront of the whole show. We have two young teachers, and we have an older doctor type. And that's the other really interesting thing about the Doctor, because even though Hartnell is not he's not doing a spin on the character that he's helping to create. But he is doing a spin on a very iconic archetype. Again, the H.G. Wells time traveler, old, wise science figure type that's prevalent in all science fiction.
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a Merlin thing too, isn't it?
He's a little Merlin-y, I guess. And I'm not trying to think of other... I mean, the way they describe him in Adventure in Space and Time is pretty spot on. H.G. Wells meets Father Christmas. Is certainly the way to describe him. Over time, he's taken on more of the action hero type of vibe than he even... I mean, in the beginning, there's very little of that. Hartnell isn't doing much. Hartnell isn't doing what even, like, Baker was doing, like, of taking off his scarf and tripping people with it. Like, Hartnell occasionally will grapple with somebody and always lose,
Yeah. They established at some point that he knows, Venusian Aikido. So they give him this, like, alien martial art at some point.
But he's so old that it's like, it's totally, that doesn't matter. What's great about Hartnell is that he just is so good at fucking people over with his wits. And his intelligence and wisdom just oozes out of every line. Although I think we should, I mean, I guess we can get into it more later, but I mean, his remembering his lines is very obvious. Like his lack of ability to do that. He fucks up his lines constantly.
It's not a huge problem in these episodes that we're talking about, because it's the first two serials. He's still really fresh, but that does.
I think I noticed it more because they emphasized them in the movie Adventure in Space and Time, so I kind of picked them out a little more. But I also think it works because Susan establishes in like the first episode that like he's super forgetful. The senile old man thing is only partially an act.
Yeah.
He genuinely does fuck up quite a bit in these first two serials in particular. But
because he is fucking old. He needs to regenerate.
Right, exactly. That's why. Yeah, I think that'll be a big part of the Christmas special, which is also why we're doing this, because the Christmas special is going to have the first Doctor in it being played by David Bradley. So. This will be a nice primer for that, obviously. But what I was going to ask you before we get into the specifics of these two serials is the TARDIS, I think, is even more like that's so far away from where we get to it in New Who, or even later on in Classic Who, that I think that stands out even more so than the Doctor. You know, because it's more so that we just don't know anything about him. You know, it's not. Right. It's not that like he himself is so radically different from what we know now, aside from him being a little meaner. But the TARDIS is like there's zero idea that it's alive or anything. I mean, the idea that the Doctor has a means by which to create food on it, actually, like that's more Star Trek than it is Doctor Who. Like there are times where they try to make you forget that he even eats and sleeps and does all these basic human functions. Like now they try to make you think that he doesn't really even have to sleep or eat. But, I mean, Hartnell constantly is like, I'm very hungry, my dear Susan. Let's go back to the TARDIS. Or I need to take a nap. Like, in... What was it called? I think it's... No, it's not Edge of Destruction. It's the rescue mission. He fucking falls asleep literally at the wheel, and it causes problems. Like, so, the TARDIS is very different. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's more of a machine in like the classical sense because, like you said, a lot of the ideas about it being alive and all this weren't yet established. It's less advanced than it is later on when we see it, you know, and that's easy enough to retcon in your mind. Maybe it's got a soft something, but
the biggest thing is when he talks about how it works. That's the thing where you go, that doesn't sound anything like the TARDIS I'm familiar with, because it's alive and it should know to correct that. Because he talks about how, like, when we go on a journey, we have to set the calculations for the entire journey, otherwise I have no control. I'm like, wait. In New Who, he literally just, like, selects a planet on, like, a screen, you know? Like, why does he have to set calculations for the entire journey? Like, surely he can just calculate a new course for each individual stop, but that's not the way he describes it early on. Now, whenever he says some bullshit like that, I always just think he's lying. I think he's perfectly capable of getting them home whenever the hell he wants. It's just a matter of, well, they're not ready to go home yet. Maybe I'm wrong, but that doesn't make much sense, that idea. I can't remember if that's in the Fire Makers, or if that's in the Dalek story, but that was some bullshit.
There is a line somewhere where Ian says, like, it's alive or something. I noticed that, but that's literally all that's even remotely, like, hinted at in that direction.
No.
You know?
That's when he first leans on it, on the police box, when he finds it in the junkyard and it's all warm and tingly.
Yeah.
And that's not because he thinks it's a living machine. It's because it's warm and that there's something in there. You know? Which could just be machine heat, which is probably what the idea was at that point. I'm interested to find out when exactly they I think it's Troughton's run that they first indicated that the TARDIS was alive. I know by Pertwee's era that he's calling it a she.
Yeah.
Although that feels more like anthropomorphism than anything else.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's also got his car, you know, Betsy.
Which is strictly anthropomorphism, and that car is definitely not alive.
Right.
I also... There's like one bit in Baker's era where he drives that car, and it feels so wrong. You know?
It's like, that's like early on, though, isn't it? When they were still trying to decide, like, whether they want, like...
He only does the whole unit science advisor a few times. Like he's not like he makes it clear from the beginning that he is not into that after he regenerates. Like he does it the one time at the beginning with the robot. He fucks off for like a season and a half, and then Brigadier has to use the telegraph to bring him back to stop the to stop the Zygons. That's the whole Loch Ness thing.
Right, yeah.
And then, and then that's it for the Brigadier. He's done until, I think, the 5 Doctors.
Probably, yeah.
and the Doctor only returns to be Unit's scientific advisor one more time after that. And then following that, he's off on his own. Because then he becomes, like, totally self-serving. He's just like, listen, I am an adventurer, I go off in space and time, and I fuck... It's like after he... Pretty much after Sarah Jane leaves, he's totally done with Unit. Anyway, we're rambling on now. So why don't we get into these two stories in particular, talk about the details. So we'll start with the Fire Makers, obviously. An Unearthly Child, as it's properly known. So, D, what do you think of the overarching story of the Fire Makers?
Well, like I said, it's their first, like, going back in time and encountering a different time period episode. And I think it's a pretty good example for the most part.
It's shockingly good. This should not work at all. These fucking these British fucks in a cave, the Doctor just hanging around in a cave. This should be boring as hell, but it's not. It is absolutely not for the most part.
Yeah, I don't think I liked it as much as I liked, like, the Aztecs, but then I've only seen that one once.
I like this more than the Aztecs. I didn't even finish the Aztecs when maybe I'd like that more now that I'm more familiar with Hartnell's run. But when I first watched that, I wasn't into it at all.
I'd have to rewatch the Aztecs because the last time I saw that was when they did those Doctors Revisited specials on the BBC back for the 50th anniversary. So it's been a while, but I remember enjoying that quite a bit.
Okay. Yeah, it was on that was on Netflix for a hot minute. That's where I saw it.
Yeah, it was on Netflix for a hot minute, but I never watched it on there because I was like, I've seen that one. I'm going to watch Pertwee drive around in a car.
Who doesn't want to watch John Pertwee drive around in an open-top gold car?
I mean, certainly not me. Yeah, it is pretty good. I mean, it's a little... There's a lot of the two cavemen characters just being like, I will make fire. No, I will make fire. Well,
There's a lot of that.
No, I have a gigantic penis. Like, it's just the presidential election all over again. And
it is very like American politics. Lots of lying, lots of lying and manipulation, and relying on your wife.
There's a lot of that. Realistically, I think we could have done with a little less of that.
Yes.
This probably could have been a 3-parter instead of a 2-parter, I think. I think you could have condensed...
3, you mean 3 instead of 4?
Well, I mean once they're actually in the past, because the first episode is kind of a non sequitur in regards to the overall...
Well, it's like the prologue.
Exactly. But, I mean, what I meant was I think we could have, like, 2 episodes of them actually in the past with the cavemen instead of 3. Because, I don't know... There's a problem in these early stories that I've noticed, and it's part of the
padding.
It's part of the whole pacing issue, and it's part of the reason why it's kind of hard to sit through these older ones, especially when you're first starting off. There's a lot of plot, like an unnecessary amount of plot, to the point where sometimes it gets a little clunky.
You mean in terms of the situation that the Doctor and his companions come upon, like what's going on in the time?
Yeah.
And I see what you're saying. I agree. I think it's a problem with a lot of classic Who, where they sort of overcompensate for the lack of like an ongoing narrative with the Doctor and the companions by just shoving information about the location we're at in this particular story and the people there down our throats. It sometimes works, like, especially when you get later and they go more off into deep space, because then you're dealing with strictly like sci-fi politics. But in this, it feels very like, I get how cavemen politics work. I don't need to see 20 minutes of it, you know? Like, a lot of it's very interesting because it's well written and it's probably not very scientifically accurate, but the ideas of it are very primal and work with our perceptions of how things may have been at the time.
As far as cavemen that I've seen portrayed in movies and television, it's maybe a little bit more on the accurate side than a lot of them. You know, there's no dinosaurs running around. It's clearly the Ice Age.
We don't see any animals, although there's a big cat that they don't call a saber-toothed tiger because those were not a real animal. We just know it's a big cat. It's probably just like a panther or something, because this would have been a time where those. I mean, I don't know if they're in England. I mean, that wouldn't account for the accents, obviously, but wherever they are, big cats being there makes sense because they were everywhere at that time. People hadn't wiped them out yet.
The cavemen dialogue is maybe a little uneven at times, where like at some point they'll use an actual word that actually is like a word that means something, but then in another scene they'll use like some sort of weird like caveman word. You know what I mean?
They feel
like
too smart, yeah.
Like they constantly refer to orb, which I gather is the sun,
Yeah,
but
it's
they
the
never
sun,
really
right.
they never explain that though.
Right. Well, when they start describing it as a divine being, I think that's an issue of like they're writing that for adults, but this is a family show. Like kids are watching too, so you should probably explain that. Like the doctor should be like, when they refer to orb, they're referring to the sun. You know, like something like that, because I don't think a kid would figure that out in a way that you and I would.
You don't even have to be that obvious about it. You could have a scene where they're mentioning orb, and then like maybe one of them looks up, and you cut to a shot of the sun or something. You know, I don't know. There's a million ways you could go about it. The point is, some exposition there would have been nice. But that's really the only issue for the most part. Like, because especially in those 4 episodes, it's a whole lot of they're in the cave. Now they've escaped from the cave. Oh, they've been recaptured. Back to the cave. Oh, look, someone's letting them out of the cave again.
I don't think enough happens in the past. Or maybe that's not even the issue. Maybe it's that the actual time travelers feel a bit like non-entities in the past because they're just locked up the whole time.
Yeah, I feel like there needs to be like a supercut version of this, where you just cut it down on a lot of that, and I think it could be really really something. It's just weird from like, and I can't help but compare this shit to Modern Who because that's what happens. It's just weird to have this like clunkiness going on because it's so not what we're used to now, where every episode for the most part is an hour and then it's done.
Right.
And there are pros and cons to both ways. I think for the most part, Classic Who has better writing because they have the ability to take time and flesh stuff out. But at the same time, they go overboard sometimes.
It's overwritten, right? And that's the other thing that makes these hold up better. The writing makes it timelessly quality. Like there's real effort here in terms of crafting dialogue and narrative that works on an intellectual level.
And also say this, for television, for 1963 in England, it's pretty well directed too. There are some like, especially like in the first episode where like they do like the flashbacks to like Susan in class being like super smart, and they do like some really weird like camera movements and shit. Like it's really visually interesting in a way that I don't think you would expect it to be,
I think the pilot is like the best standalone episode of Doctor Who ever, An Unearthly Child. Because you don't have to watch the stuff with the cavemen to get it. Like, when you see that, you're like, oh, they're in the past now. The Doctor took them to the past because it's almost like a short film. You have these 2 teachers who are worried about one of their students. She's very smart. It's like the building up of a sci-fi concept, and then we have the sort of payoff for it at the very end. It's so effective.
It almost feels like a movie that would have been made in the 50s, where you find out that the student is an alien and that she's planning to take over Earth.
Right? It does kind of feel that. And the Doctor feels like the big scary like head that she talks to on the TV, but he's actually there. Yeah, it's super effective science fiction, and I think that's just all the best Classic Who can simply be broken down in those terms. Whether or not it's iconic good Doctor Who is irrelevant if it's good compelling science fiction or even just good compelling drama. And I think that's the other thing with this early story as well is that despite
did you notice that they took her last name Foreman from the junkyard where they had parked the TARDIS?
That makes sense. Okay, that's cool.
There's a shot where you see Ian and Barbara sitting in the car, and they're looking at the gate to the junkyard. This is all fascinating because if you've seen Adventure in Space and Time, you have an idea of how limited the cameras were at this point. So the fact that they were able to do all of this interesting direction that I'm talking about is a miracle unto itself. But yeah, they're sitting there, and if you look closely, the sign says like Foreman's Junkyard or something.
Right.
So clearly they landed there. She needed a last name because she wanted to go to school or whatever, and she just used that as her last name.
Why did she want to go to school?
That's a good question.
So she
That's
wants
the
to fit in.
that's the
And,
one thing that needs more explaining. I'd really like Susan needs to come back at some point in New Who. We need to revisit that.
yeah. Well, I mean, they did bring her back in the Eighth Doctor's adventures in books and audio dramas or whatever. But apparently, I looked into that because I was interested in it. Apparently, not much is done with it. Like, they kind of meet up again, and then, like, he doesn't really even reveal himself to her. Or maybe she doesn't reveal herself to him?
I think the actress is still alive, isn't she?
I'm pretty sure.
They could totally have her show up for an episode, and then maybe she regenerates into a younger actress so that we can have her appear more in the future if we want to.
I don't know if she has her Time Lordy powers anymore, though. Or if she ever even became a full-on Time Lord. Because she never went to the Academy.
That's another thing that would need explaining, because her character is so fucking mysterious. I don't know.
Yeah, well, she was at a time where we knew nothing about the Doctor's past, so we had no indication of Gallifrey or the Time Lords or regeneration. So I don't think she was anything more than a normal Gallifreyan, or better put, a normal human being.
There was a moment in season 8 of New Who when I thought that they had brought Susan back for like a split second. Was when the Doctor was trying to figure out who Missy was, and he's like, "Who are you?" And one of the hints she says is, "I'm the one you left behind." For a second, I was like, "Susan?" But then I was like, "No, she wouldn't be evil though."
Yeah, but she wouldn't, because the moment where he does leave her behind is very. It's a little bit like, it's there. You have to kind of ponder the ethics of it for a second, but it's very charming and heartwarming at the end, like what he really did, because he knew that she was never going to leave him of her own will, because she was too used to feeling like she had to be at his side. So he knew that he would have to kind of shove her out the door in the nicest way that Hartnell could.
Yeah.
So that's what I love about that. But
it's one of the nicer things about the Five Doctors is that Susan's in that, and she gets to go on another adventure.
Right. Well, the only problem there is that she's so noticeably older, and then it's not Hartnell's. It's like a guy who's like fresh and new at playing the first Doctor, and it doesn't work. But
to be honest, the thing about her being in that interests me is her meeting all these like newer regenerations of her grandfather.
Right.
And being like, "Oh, regenerations, that's totally a thing that I knew about all along."
Right. That I probably can't do.
It's New Who though. If they wanted her to regenerate, they could work a way around.
Well, they would explain that she was a Time Lord, which would be fine. I mean, based on what I see in this, I would say if I was gonna write it that she wasn't, that she was just some bumblefuck Gallifreyan. Because we also we don't know to the extent of we have no indication of the Doctor's family. Like, so obviously we know that he's got kids, But so whose child is Susan?
If River Song could regenerate just because she was conceived inside of a TARDIS, then I'm sure they would write some stupid reason for her to be able to do it.
Right. Well, I mean, I just always assumed that the way you become they explain in that the way the Time Lords become Time Lords is they expose themselves to, the untempered schism, the radiation of unfractured time and space. So that's where all the regeneration and crazy stuff comes from.
And that's great, if only the continuity in this universe was stronger and more established, and wasn't such a.
That's the weird thing with Doctor Who, though, isn't it?
Like buffet type.
We all have to have our own headcanon, but isn't that kind of beautiful? Because it's this thing that evolved over time. You and I always talk about how nobody really created Doctor Who. Like, there is no one person you can identify as the creator of Doctor Who. There's so many people that were involved in the different iconic elements of it that you kind of have you have to name all of them.
You can isolate certain people, but it's never, this is the guy who made Who. It's always, this is the guy who made this era of Doctor Who.
Right, or this is the person who introduced this element of it, the actor, writer, producer, whoever.
if you're talking about now, you can do that with the Daleks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But like if you look at the stuff that we're watching or we watched for this episode, you look at Lambert and Newman. Yeah, he had the idea, she developed it. Bada bing, bada boom. That's who started it all
They
off.
didn't write the script, obviously.
But it's so different from anything that it was at that time. Now, it's insane. I mean, you get it. It changes.
Yeah, but I think I was getting to this before. I think the relationship between the Doctor and the companions is one of the biggest differences because obviously they're unwilling, and they don't like him at all. So
by the end of the Doctor story, you can tell that they've started to grow, or he started to grow on them, more. But
you can you can see that it's gone both ways, where they've come to this point of like, we're all okay with each other's existence, and we're all sort of okay with what they've all sort of grown to trust each other, as opposed to liking each other, I guess is the way to put it. Because they begin to realize that they're stuck with him because of this insane lifestyle that he leads. This Doctor also feels very Rick from Rick and Morty and how he operates, because he's just such a loose unit,
Yeah.
I mean, he obviously doesn't have the kind of vulgar sense of humor that you could kind of point to more of a Capaldi Doctor to compare to Rick. But the lifestyle is more Rick than the 12th Doctor, who has more control over the TARDIS and what he's doing.
Listen, Susan, I'm going to need you to shove these seeds way up your butt.
Yeah, exactly. You can totally imagine Hartnell ordering Susan to shove something up her ass in order to save his life, But not so much for any other Doctor, even Capaldi. But because he'd say it and then he'd be like, "No, I wouldn't really have you do that. That's gross." But Hartnell would totally have Susan do that, and he would be so like fucking superior about it as well. Like, Susan, can you imagine somebody as old as me doing that? How dare you? He would somehow turn it on her.
I'm just imagining Capaldi. That's
what I love about Hartnell so much, is he always manages to somehow turn any situation on the other person. Like, Ian will start some shit with him, and somehow he'll bring it back on him and be like, "How dare you question me, young man? This is my ship." I just love whenever he calls anybody young man. Like, this isn't Hartnell, but there's that moment in the Five Doctors where the guy playing the first Doctor, whose name I can't remember, fucking goes up to fucking the Brigadier and he's like, "Now listen here, young man." And I'm just like, he's like almost as old as you, realistically.
Richard Herndl, that's his name.
Did they intentionally get somebody who had a similar name?
I do not know.
That's fucking weird. But I love that. I just love how, again, he's so patronizing, but it's in such a charming way. He can get away with it.
What I love about all this now is that now I have this mental image of Capaldi being like, "Hey, Clara, I need you to shove the seed up your bum."
Yeah, exactly. But again, then he'd be like, "What do you mean? I would never have you do that. That's fucking disgusting. Like we'll throw the seeds into space. We'll tow them behind the TARDIS. We'll shove them up the TARDIS's ass." Anyway. So I've been meaning to build on this. I think the drama of the, kind of tension between Ian and Barbara and the Doctor and Susan helps with making the drama of being back in time and the cavemen not only more tolerable, but just there's more going on. There's a little bit of bickering and not even just bickering, but there's just, there's actual drama going on between the people who have traveled back in time outside of the situation they're dealing with when they get there, which is good when we're literally just dealing with people trying to create fire,
Yeah, if it was just that, I think it would get really old really quickly because those
If they
scenes
were
where the
all
cave.
buddy and like the Fourth Doctor and Sarah, or not even that, like they bicker a little bit, but it's more playful. Like it's not like that. They have serious problems with each other.
Because if it was just the fucking cavemen bickering for the entire time and being like, well, my penis is 7 inches, it's well, mine's 18. That's literally what those scenes feel like
Yeah.
early on when Callan's are like, I'm gonna make fire. No, I make fire.
His mate is the best, I think, of them. The female.
Yeah,
She
I love that
does she does the most.
I love that her name is Her.
Yeah, that is great because she's the only girl of note in the past.
No, there's also the old woman. I really liked the old woman because she's like insane.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she is. She is also interesting. Because what I like about all of them is that they're so easily manipulated. Like they'll change their minds in a heartbeat. You know.
But she's also strangely prophetic. Like she says, "Fire will get us all killed one
Yeah,
day."
that is all really interesting when she's like,
And I'm like,
giving
yeah,
them fire is the beginning of the end of civilization. Because like Ian and the Doctor don't feel that way about it. They both see showing these people how to create fire as like, oh well, they should know. Otherwise they'll die. Like everybody should know how to make a fire. Like that's Ian's whole point when he's building it in the cave.
yeah. At some point, I'm like, how did this old woman in the Ice Age get a hold of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? Because that seems to be her attitude about this whole thing.
Right, right. Yeah, it is very
Acknowledge
Frankenstein.
bad.
Fire bad. um.
Uh,
uh, what was I gonna say though? But yeah, no, I like how primal and animalistic they are. I think that's all a testament to the performances. Like they don't come off as just normal people in skins. It's not like it's not as good, obviously, as like 1,000,000 BC, which we watched. Which they don't even speak in that, so that's obviously a step above.
there's a little bit of speaking, but for the most part, no.
When do they speak? Do they speak English?
Well, remember when he gets to that other tribe and they're more intelligent, and
They speak English, right?
yeah,
That's right. Okay, so there is a little bit of that, but it's more. It makes more sense in that. It's played a little more realistically.
yeah, because the idea is more advanced. They have a language. They have technology. They're the Cro-Magnon, basically.
Right, right.
Uh,
But this is like they're all talking to each other. Another thing that's not established, I think, until way later, is that the TARDIS communicates for it. That the TARDIS is a universal translator.
Yeah, the translation circuit thing hasn't been established yet.
I don't know if that's even established until New Who.
I think it is at some point. But basically, also they established very early on in the second episode, the Doctor being shocked that the TARDIS didn't change from the police box into something else.
Yeah, I like that they do that for us in this. Like, I like that that didn't happen like in the past. Like, oh, it's always been stuck as a police box. Like that happens in this. Like that's cool.
Yeah, that's great, but they don't explain it as being the chameleon circuit thing, and I don't know when that comes into it.
Right. Well, it's like the
when...
idea of it is the same. It's just the name that we never get.
Right.
Nothing has a name until like Baker's era.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I feel like they came up with the whole translation thing at some point as basically a way to retroactively explain the fact that no matter where they go, people are speaking English. That was some writer's brilliant way of doing that. That's like there's an episode in Star Trek: The Next Generation that explains why most of the intelligent aliens in the galaxy are humanoid. They basically did Prometheus years before Prometheus was a thing. There's like this ancient race of aliens.
The Cardassians, yeah, I know this.
No, the Cardassians aren't the ones who did it. The Cardassians are those. They're one of the recurring villains in TNG and DS9. It was some other ancient race that basically did the Prometheus thing. They like traveled across the galaxy, like spreading their DNA around and caused life to develop into similar shapes. But
just like every man.
but yeah, there's a nice bit of retroactive explanation, which is pretty much the history of Doctor Who.
Yeah, that's the entire run of Doctor Who. I mean, Star Trek even has maintained that into rebooting itself, where they rebooted in continuity.
Yeah,
because
Yeah.
they did the whole time travel thing. So
Star Trek also has a similar conceit in that there's like a universal translation device that that's also a thing in Star Trek. That's why the aliens all show up speaking English, but then they can also like fucking like be like, but here's some Klingon for you, you know.
right.
Uh,
Guardians of the Galaxy does that as well. There's universal translators in everybody's cerebrums.
yeah, yeah. I feel like any space opera type thing that should just be the conceit from now on, because it's a genius
Star
way to
Wars
get around.
really should just do that. Although no, they don't really need it though because they have basic and then they have all the other languages.
Right, yeah. Star Wars has that thing of like, basically it's how it is in the real world. There's a lingua franca that most people throughout the galaxy have to know for like business reasons, and then there's all their other languages that they just happen to come from their cultures.
Right. Anyway, this isn't about all that.
So that's another way of doing it.
So
most of this episode, if not translated, would sound more like
Right.
fire.
They definitely should. I think the point we were building to though is that they should have explained that early on.
I'd love to see an episode of Doctor Who where the translation thing isn't working, and like just have
That would be cool.
just have some companion like stumbling around like I don't know ancient Scotland or something, trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah.
The-
Well, I mean, it would only be interesting if they're cut off from the Doctor, because if they're with the Doctor, like it's not a problem, because he knows all the languages anyway.
Right. I think that's how you do another like straight up historical episode again. Is you cut them off from the Doctor somehow, because then it's not about
him in the TARDIS or have him get captured or something.
because then it's not a matter of him having something to face up against that's worthy of him. It's more a matter of them being stuck in this other time without the Doctor there to help them.
Right. Yeah, that would be cool. Chibnall, I hope you're taking notes or listening to this at all.
Right.
So, yeah, no, I think that would be cool. But what I was going to ask you was, how do you feel about Ian and Barbara in general? We've already kind of talked about Susan. I guess we can kind of give our more strict like watchability opinions on her now. But what do you think of the companions?
I like them a lot. You know, they're basic people.
They
you know?
all have their moments where I'm like, you're a 1960s archetype. But
Yeah.
But I think they all have their pros and cons that, you're right, make them work as just real people. Ian is definitely, like, he does the most because he's the dashing about male lead of the 1960s adventure serial.
I like that Ian's relationship with the Doctor is a bit more contentious, whereas Barbara, you know, she'll tend to agree with Ian, like, we want to go home. This is fucking weird. But whenever they're in the thick of a situation, she tends to side with the Doctor a lot. Like the Doctor will be like, this is none of our business. We should just leave and let all the Thals die. And she'll be like, yeah, he's got a point.
Right. Well, because the Doctor makes a good point, which is, this isn't our planet. This isn't our time. Let's fuck off. The only reason they don't fuck off is because they can't.
Exactly.
We should.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think Ian, but I think over time he and the Doctor also developed this sort of like almost father-son kind of bond.
I like Ian. I like Ian a lot more than I like Barbara.
Yeah, I was going to say Barbara has a lot more bad qualities. I would say more even than Susan, only because Susan.
She doesn't get to do.
Yeah, that's
much.
her thing.
And Ian gets to first of all, he's a science teacher, so whenever they're in the midst of like a sciencey thing, he's maybe not on the same level as the Doctor, but he's in that wheelhouse.
I mean, he's a fucking He's like an elementary school teacher. So come on.
When William
they
Hartnell
may be
says,
in England, but they're still not making that much.
but he knows like basic science.
Yeah.
So when William Hartnell says, they're using static electricity, Ian's like, I know what you're talking about right there. That's great. Barbara, I mean, she didn't really get, like, I would have loved a moment during the caveman thing where she was like, we're in the Ice Age, but she doesn't. She
gets those moments, but it makes her feel like kind of a know-it-all, as opposed to, which is interesting because like that's the Doctor's whole character trait. So to have another character in there that's doing that could be interesting, but she does it in more of a way where it's like she has to do something. So we'll have her do this. We'll have her casually mention this thing about history or correct something. But the other thing is the Doctor is constantly downcutting her. Like, they bring it up in Edge of Destruction, like the fact that he's constantly like criticizing her and saying that she's wrong. I mean, he does it to Ian as well, but he doesn't give a fuck. Like, and it's so constant that it clearly does start to bother her. And I think that it only makes it more of a problem that she just doesn't get as much to do. They just kind of, and it's even like her character as well. She feels like a bit of a, well, whatever the rest of you want to do, I'll do. She doesn't really have an independent drive. Like, too much of the time, she'll get cut off from the rest of them. Some other random person in that time or place they're in will say, hey, you, do this, and she'll just do it. You know? She'll go off with the guards, or she'll be taken by some person. And it just makes her feel a bit like, what's the word? I guess it just makes her feel the opposite of proactive. Inactive, you know? Just like, easily led. That's what I was looking for. You know? And that's no good. So I agree with you. I think Ian definitely has more going for him than Barbara does. But they come as a package. You can't have one without the other.
No.
Susan, I think her only thing is that the actress is playing a younger character than she is, and it's very distracting. That's the only problem with her. Because she's clearly not 15, or if she is, she looks older. If they had an actual 15-year-old or a younger actress, I think the performance would work better, because she plays a very young, naive 15-year-old, you know? And I think nowadays when we see a 15-year-old, we're used to a very worldly, internet-based 15-year-old who's seen a horse fuck a man, you know? So we're dealing with a very different... So I think you and I are more used to, like, a 15-year-old who would come on and, like, be wisecracking with the Doctor, or, you know, having, like, this kind of more playful banter, whereas we're dealing with a 1960s granddaughter-grandfather relationship where she respects him to a fault, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that element of it is, like, the only thing that makes her a little difficult to watch at points, but nothing in the writing of her character is problematic. That's where I think she has a leg up over Barbara. But Dee, I think we've talked quite a bit about the caveman stuff. Is there anything else you want to say before we get into the Daleks?
There's not a ton more to say. Cavemen want fire. Cavemen get fire.
Hartnell lights up at one point. That's what gets him in trouble. They catch him lighting up.
Doctor and companions escape.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you notice that weird thing that happens in these early episodes of Doctor Who, it must have something to do with the types of cameras they were using. Whenever there's like fire or some flash of light or something, there's like this weird bubbly effect that happens sometimes.
It looks like the film is burning.
Yeah.
I think that's because of the I think this is because of the cheapness of what they were shooting on.
It's a really surreal effect at some point.
I think that's the really cool part about all of classic Doctor Who, is it has this very, like, alien, bizarre, creepy feel, because it's the low-budget nature of it forces these restrictions that forces them to be more creative in how they show you things. So it has this very, like, minimalistic but still off-putting alien vibe to it, you know? And I think Hartnell's era, maybe more than any other, has that.
Yeah, the black and white has something to do with that, too. I think it's still there when they go to color in the Pertwee era, but it's a little less so.
Yeah, because it's more poppy, isn't it? And the action took over. It's not the creepy. Yeah. It's not the creepy science adventure. Like, this is more of a science fiction. This feels like more of a science fiction film than later on when it becomes more of the action series. You know, like this.
Well, John Pertwee is when it went from being H.G. Wells crossed with Father Christmas to H.G. Wells crossed with James Bond.
Right. Yeah, well, they took the time traveler idea and made him an action, and made him more of a time hero you know?
Yeah.
Like Trout, I mean, I think they started that even with Troughton, and maybe even the end of Hartnell's era. But he's a bumbling adventurer at this point, you know? Not out there to save lives. He does it sometimes. But the rule of him not killing unless he has to is they're very concrete about that early on. I think it's like the second Dalek story where he says, "I only kill whenever I have to."
Which is all day, every day.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he picks up a gun at one point in these early stories, and I remember there's one part in one of Baker's stories where he literally just like blows a rat's head off, like a giant rat with like a gun, like an elephant gun. And I remember at the time being like, "Oh my god!" Like the modern Doctor would never do that.
Well, he says that, but occasionally.
He doesn't like, but they wouldn't write a situation where he would just blow something's head off. Like he would do it in a different way because they wouldn't want to shoot that. I wish they would. I agree with you. I think they should because I think that's more interesting.
That's what I loved about Eccleston, man. Like he was going to blow that Dalek to smithereens. Like he was ready.
Yeah, Eccleston would just pick up a gun, absolutely.
And John Hurt's got that too because he's pre-Eccleston.
The classic Doctor was fun. I mean, the Tennant and Smith both pick up guns to use as tools, but they never use it to shoot somebody or even threaten to.
Tennant has that thing in End of Time, and then Matt Smith has probably the most memorable scene of him with a gun is the one from in season 5, the Weeping Angel thing.
That's what I was referring to. Yeah, where he's like, "There's one thing you never put in a trap, me." Yeah, so let's move on to the Daleks.
Meanwhile, Hartnell's Doctor would have been like, "Oh no, I've been put into a trap. Well, I guess we'd better sit here and wait for some kindly cave woman to come."
I guess that's the last thing I'll say before we get strictly into the Daleks. Hartnell sometimes feels like a non-entity, and that's problematic. Like sometimes he just the writing of him forces them to just kind of stick him in the background until the absolute last minute. And he kind of, you forget that he's there, you know? Like he'll be gone for like almost an entire episode. Because they're doing stuff with Ian and Barbara and the Thals and the cavemen and the Daleks and whoever.
Yeah. A lot of times he seems pretty useless, you know?
Yeah, well, he's just off sitting, scolding everybody. And it's only fun in those small doses. Like they really needed to find a way to have him be more involved, you know? Like he just I don't know what he's been doing in his other adventures, you know? Like he seems so against doing anything.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Early on. There's that one, he shows promise initially when he's like, "I'm going to off and find some samples," and then he just goes off and he smokes. Like, that's awesome. Although I think that's how he's getting the samples, is he's, like, smoking them, which is bizarre.
I like how Hart Doctor has to go get, like, soil samples to figure out where he is.
Yeah, which is... I think the scanner was broken. I think that was the idea. Because in every other fucking episode, he just kind of... He does a calculation based on what the TARDIS is showing, and he's able to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, man, that's the whole thing in the caveman episode. He's like... turns on the scanner and he's like, "Look, that's what's outside." And Ian's like, "I don't believe you." And then he opens the door and he's like, "Look, that's what's outside."
Yeah, I that's all great. Yeah, again, the build up to the TARDIS being in the past is very, very cool. Oh, there's another bit of continuity they fucked up, because when Susan says, because she says it's time and relative dimension in space. I call it TARDIS for short. Later on, when we get to Gallifrey, they're all calling them TARDISes.
Yeah. Susan made that up originally.
Yeah, so they changed. They fucked that up. Based on, and I didn't realize that until I watched this. But yeah, the Time Lords never called them or they supposedly had never called them that until Susan came up with that in this version, but they
Kind of like
obviously forgot.
kind of like how Ian McKellen Magneto was like, me and Charles totally built Cerebro, bro. And then you go
Right.
back in time, like, Beast built Cerebro.
All right. And it's like Magneto totally taught at my school. He was bad before it was even a thing.
Also, he was there with me when I recruited Jean, but then it's the 80s and she's a teenager and I'm still not Patrick Stewart. It's very confusing.
Very confusing indeed. Anyway, so I think we can move on to the Daleks finally. So
Yeah, and you know what's weird? If you had asked me a week ago which of these two serials was my favorite, it would be a no-brainer, obviously the Dalek one. But now I'm not sure because
yeah, I think the Fire Makers is better paced.
Yeah, because here's the thing. I think it's overly long. I think that problem I was just talking about with the Firemakers, where there's like way more plot than necessary, and it just feels kind of clunky and shit. That's way more of a problem with the Daleks, honestly. And it's a shame because they're the fucking Daleks. Like,
right. It's still really good, and I do think that the concepts of it overshadow the first story. Like I'll rewatch the Dalek story before I'll rewatch the Firemakers. I might rewatch An Unearthly Child again, but not the Firemaker story. I'll rewatch the Daleks though. Maybe not all of it though. I think
that's the thing.
We get too into it with the Thals. Like that's where it loses me anyway.
Yeah, it's and it's weird because let's compare it to my favorite Classic Who episode, Genesis of the Daleks.
Yeah.
Practically the same length. That one's 6 episodes, I think. This one's 7, so this is a little bit longer. That never feels boring to me, though.
There's a lot going on in that, though.
There is a lot going on. Like, they have tons of plot, but somehow they pull it off.
And the Doctor's missing for a lot of it because they're all constantly getting captured and being thrown around different camps. There's a lot of similar things, but it's just balanced better. And I mean, there's a lot that they had to. You can't get that without this, though. Obviously, and I think
the mythology in that and the mythology in this original Daleks episode do not line up very well at all.
I think the second one's more problematic though because
there are lots of inconsistencies between those two, and you could just say, "Oh well, timey-wimey, butterfly effect."
I don't know about that though. It feels weirder because of to me because when the Daleks invade Earth, the Doctor and I know we're not talking about that story, but I've rewatched it recently, so I want to mention it.
What's really weird about it is that it's all Terry Nation, so it's totally his
that's
fault.
why it's so bizarre that it's inconsistent. But because in that the Doctor is like, oh, we're in like the middle of the Daleks run now. When we were on Skaro, it was the far future. I was like, wait a second. So the Daleks were out invading other planets while they were stuck in their own city.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense at all. Like you would think that the Daleks would have expanded outwards after being defeated by the Doctor and the Thals in the first story. That would make more sense.
That's the way I see it. Again, headcanon time. I don't care what Hartnell said. He was smoking some fucking crack.
He was smoking some soil samples.
This episode, the Daleks, is definitely the earliest we ever have met them until Genesis when we go back even further.
Right.
And then there's like the second Davros.
Even in like New Who in season 9 when we went to like when Davros was a kid.
Oh shit, yeah, so now we've gone back even further, haven't we? And then there's also like the second Davros episode back in Classic Who, which I think that's still Baker, or maybe it's the next guy.
I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't know.
But they find him, and he's like still in the place where he like supposedly died at the end of Genesis, but he's been like resurrected or whatever. So that technically is in between that and this story. Point is, this was the earliest at the time.
And the idea of them is simplified. They strictly come off as I mean, there is quite a bit that does line up. The names are the same, right? The dolls and the Thals. Like I've rewatched Genesis
because in Genesis,
what are they called?
they're not dolls. They're called Khalids. And then basically, Davros came up with the name Dalek by just switching the K and the D, essentially.
Wait.
But yeah,
So Davros's people, what are they called again?
the Khalids.
The Khalids. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Thals are the same.
Right, the Thals are the same. But as far as I know, we never hear the name dolls again.
It sounds dumb. I think that's why they changed it. Like
basically, Terror Nation came up with Daleks in this episode, and then a few years later, he was like, "Oh, I just came up with a much better version of the origin." So, retcon.
The simplified nature of it is not in the name, though. It's in the fact that there was a neutron bomb explosion, which is a nuclear bomb times a million. It's a nuclear bomb, but on a planetary level. It's like the Alpha Omega bomb from Planet of the Apes.
Right, but interesting enough, it doesn't affect machinery.
It only affects life, right?
Hartnell explains that it basically destroyed all the organic matter, petrified it, but it left like machinery intact. But then later on, we find out that there are still like swamps and shit that are active, so that doesn't make sense.
They're all mutations, though.
Oh, I like the fact that obviously this is because it wasn't even a thing yet, but I like the fact that the Dalek inside the tank isn't a squid yet. Like when they pull it out of the thing, we never get to see what it looks like, but it has a hand.
Yes, whatever it is, and I do like that. Like we don't get to see it because there is no way they could have made it look good at that point.
They did the same thing in Genesis.
Yeah, we don't see them in that either.
I'm really curious whether Classic Who ever showed what they were supposed to look like on the inside.
I don't think they did. I think it was season 1 of New Who. Yeah. I think that was a big deal when that Dalek opened up and we saw it bathing in the sunlight.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's supposed to be the official, like, boom, this is what they look like. It's canon now, bitches. But,
and they stuck with that because we see them a fucking, like, every time they bring them back, we got a glimpse of what the squid looks like in there.
Yeah, now we can't go, like, when's the last... Has there been a Dalek episode in recent memory where they didn't show the squid on the inside? That's actually... I gotta think about that.
Did we see... well, I mean, we don't. They don't have their own episode in season 10. They're in the first one with the puddle girl.
Right, but
we don't see the Magician's Apprentice. The Magician's Apprentice 2-parter. I don't think so. Maybe.
I don't remember. Did we ever see one in Asylum of the Daleks? I don't remember.
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. And I mean, the one I remember the most is the Dalek Emperor. That's the other thing about the Daleks that constantly changes. In New Who, it bothers me a lot. The government, like, I don't understand how the government works. You know?
Neither do that. There's a lot of political unrest with those Daleks. You know, it's kind of like a Middle Eastern country. The regime is changing all the time.
Like, there's a parliament, there's a Davros, there's an emperor, there's a cult of Skaro, there's...
Let's try and trace this, shall we? So Davros creates the Daleks, right? And he's like, yo, I created y'all, so I'm like your god, and you're going to, like, obey me and shit. And the Daleks were like, nah, fam, and they shot him. But then he got resurrected at some point, and I'm not sure what happened to him after that.
Yeah, I'll let you know. I'll let you know when I get there.
And then when we get to this story, there's just like a couple of Daleks sitting in a control room, and they're running the whole show because at that point their entire civilization is just like a city.
Right. Well, this is like the idea here isn't even that these are the perfect life forms made for conquering all life in the universe. These are creatures that have survived this war, this great war, and this is what life would look like if it was going to be best fit to adapt to that kind of environment. You know, locked in a tank, you know?
Then eventually we get to that one Troughton story that I'm pretty sure is lost, where we got the first Dalek Emperor. So that was a thing, the Dalek Master Plan. That's like a whole big thing. I'm pretty sure that's the one. So there's then they introduced the Dalek Emperor. Then there's no mention of a Dalek Emperor until the 80s, and then Davros is the Dalek Emperor all of a sudden, but then there's another faction that's not under his control, and they're at war with each other.
Oh, there's also there's also the Black Daleks, which are the individual commanders.
Right? Then we go into the Time War, and suddenly the Dalek Emperor and Davros are two separate entities who I guess are coexisting in some sort of fashion.
They never explain that.
And then he's basically a pet in season 4.
Right. Like they're literally just keeping him alive to make more Daleks.
But then in season 9, he's like, they're protecting him because they have like this, he's programmed like some sort of like affection for their father into them. And I think he probably did that because he was a pet in season 4 and he didn't want that to happen again.
Well, he made them the new Daleks that are the threat all throughout Stephen Moffat's run. He made them from his own DNA. So I think that's what's going on.
He made those ones in season 4 from his own DNA, but then they traveled back in time and they used the little egg thing to make a new Dalek paradigm that had like pure Dalek DNA. So now that's not even his DNA.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay.
World War II Dalek was the last of the Davros Daleks.
Right. Okay. And then they make the new Power Ranger Daleks.
Yeah.
I haven't watched Victory of the Daleks in a while.
And then who knows what happened to them.
Yeah, we haven't seen them since season 7. They're the heads of the Parliament.
Also, he's got like a henchman who's a snake or something.
Yes, which is also where, why don't the Daleks kill him? Do they have affection for him?
Why is he a snake?
Yeah. What is he?
Wouldn't it have made more sense if he had like opened his cloak and it turned out that he was some sort of like humanoid Dalek sort of like cyborg thingy? Like wouldn't that been
not
cooler
not like the human Dalek hybrid from season 3.
No, more like there's one episode in Classic Who where they had like these humans that were quote unquote being turned into Daleks, but essentially what it boiled down to was like a goofy looking helmet on their head.
Well, they do the Robomen in the Dalek Invasion of Earth, where the Daleks sort of Dalek-ize people, in the sense that they cut out all the parts of their brain that wouldn't work for a Dalek, and then they fill out the rest with robot parts.
Or you know what it would be like? I know you haven't watched Torchwood, but there's a cyber woman in one episode, and basically what she is a woman who was in the midst of being converted into a Cyberman when Canary Wharf happened, and so now she's like part Cyberman, part human.
Interesting. Is she like crazy?
Well, so her boyfriend is keeping her in the basement unbeknownst to Jack, and he's trying to like help her. But then something goes wrong, and her Cyberman programming takes over her brain, and they have to destroy her because she's going to kill everybody.
That's a very Torchwood plot based on what I am familiar with of it.
Yeah, that's one of the.
It sounds like a really good one though.
That's a pretty good episode.
Because Torchwood's all about like the impact of Doctor Who being felt on Earth. It's sort of like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but with Doctor Who and better, probably.
Especially because there's one scene where the Cyberwoman fights that pterodactyl that's always flying around in their base. I don't know where they got that fucking pterodactyl, but I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't... don't look at me. So back to this first Dalek story, though. So I think the simplified idea of, if you're going to survive a nuclear apocalypse, locking yourself in a mechanical tank and just being a squid is the way to do it. Because you're safe from all the radiation and from all the other stuff that can kill you. And the idea being that they're scared of anything different from that. That's why they're like, kill, exterminate anything! I think that totally works for this. And the fact that later on they added all that detail to it only enhances this. So I think everything with Daleks in this is really, really, really good. Best of Hartnell stuff level good.
You know what's interesting is that the exterminate really wasn't their catchphrase yet. They say it a couple times throughout the episode, but most of their dialogue is more like actual like dialogue.
They're not as kill happy in this. They're more they're more politically calculating.
Well, I think what's clear is that when you watch this episode, what's clear is that these were never monsters that were meant to show up again, I don't think.
No.
But
I
what
mean,
happened
they
was
literally destroy them at the end.
But what happened was they were a smash. They were a huge sensation. There was a postage stamp with a Dalek on it in the 60s. Like, that's how big this thing got. Children, like, were more interested in the Daleks than they were even the Doctor. Like, this was phenomenal. This is what put the show on the map practically. 'Cause, I mean,
Right.
they had one serial before this, and I'm sure it was probably still on shaky footing. But then this Dalek story happens, and suddenly it becomes infamous as the show that made all the kids hide behind the couch. And so then they were like, well, now we have to bring them back. Problem is, that last Dalek story was pretty conclusive. And that's
Right.
really, that's the history of Daleks has become that, hasn't it? It's always like, oh, we've killed them off for good this time. And then next time they show up, they're like, here's the convenient story of how we weren't killed last time. Ha
Right.
ha ha.
Right. Yeah, that is it's an ongoing issue with the Daleks. The Doctor is constantly saying, like, they're never going to be a problem. Like, do you remember when he fucking erased him from their memory? Ugh. What a fucking anticlimax that was. We looked you up on Google, and now we know everything about you again.
Yeah, because the next time he runs into the Daleks, I'm pretty sure they know him again. So
No, well,
clearly,
what happens is he erases their memory in early season 7, and then in Time of the Doctor, they regain, because in Day of the Doctor, those are all Daleks that are in the Time War, so it's fine that they know who he is. But
right.
the
Well,
Daleks,
any Dalek from a period of time prior to him erasing their memories would know, obviously.
right? But when we see them again in Time of the Doctor, they don't know until they read the records of the whatever the hell that big ship and lady were called.
When they try to do like weird status quo changes like that,
Because then they just
like,
they just shift them back in a second.
well, it doesn't even work because if you think about it for like a second, it falls apart. They're like,
Right.
oh, now all the Daleks don't know who he is, and I'm like, yeah, until he gets in the time machine and runs into a Dalek from before the Time War happened, and then they still know who he is because
I don't know if that's possible though.
that hasn't happened yet. Time travel makes like
A
all
lot
the
of
changes.
Doctor Who hurt.
All of the changes that his enemies go through are pretty much inconsequential because he could easily just run into a previous version of them on one of his adventures. The Cybermen have been up. The Cybermen have been upgraded.
The Cybermen, yeah.
The Cybermen have been upgraded. Cool, but he can still run into any of the other ones, like at any time.
Right. Well, I mean, in that last Cyberman story they did in New Who, in season 10, they talk about like how there's 3 different places the Cybermen could originate. Cybus Industries, whatever planet, the ones that are allergic to gold, because they're not the Mondasian Cybermen. Or maybe they are. The ones that are in Revenge of the Cybermen. I don't know if those are from Mondas or not. I could be wrong.
Such a shame that we can't watch.
That's still my favorite Cyberman story though. Is Revenge of the Cybermen. Have you seen that one?
Of all the episodes that are lost, I think I'm the most sad about Ted's Planet. Well, either that or Dalek Master Plan, because apparently that's a huge deal. But those are like the two, man.
Yeah.
If there's any Doctor Who story that I'd like them to find tomorrow, it would probably be one of those two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's so bizarre that we can't see the story that Hartnell regenerated in.
I know. I mean, we can find clips of that scene online, and that's great. I mean, at least I know what the regeneration looked like, but we never get to have it in context. I wonder if they have enough of the audio files to where they could animate it the way that they did with that Dalek story recently.
I don't know. I do not know. So let's talk about one of the better morally ambiguous things the Doctor does. He lies to Ian, Barbara, and everybody about the fluid intake needing mercury to get them to go down to the city. And, I think that's a really good example of he does that in a way that makes sense, and it doesn't just feel like unnecessary him being a dick. Like, that totally seems like something he would do, because he's into this for the adventure and mystery and science of it all. He's not trying to get them home. They forced themselves on his ship. Now he's doing what he wants with it.
I really wish that had been a surprise to me the first time I had watched this episode. But unfortunately, I saw Doctor Who and the Daleks with Peter Cushing long before I ever actually saw the Daleks.
Yeah, I mean that's my problem as well. And
So I already knew that was coming. Watching these 7 episodes is like a weird, super drawn out version of that movie.
it's better than that movie, though.
It is better than that movie. That movie doesn't work. First of all, it
No.
doesn't work. It doesn't work because when Peter Cushing does that, it feels like it comes out
It
of left
feels
field
very out of character for that version of Doctor Who, as he's known.
because he's nice, friendly, grandfather Peter Cushing in that movie. He's not like this like get off my fucking ship. Like
I mean, he's
like
a little
Hartnell
bit with Ian. He doesn't like Ian. Because they had
Right.
their own Ian, and he was very different from... Their Ian and Barbara are very different, because Barbara is also his granddaughter in that.
Yeah. So
And Susan's an actual child, which was probably a good idea. And she could be 15, but they should have gotten an actual 15-year-old. But I think the idea works better given that we have all that development and tension between the Doctor and Ian and Barbara already from the Cavemen 4-parter. So it just makes more sense.
right, and you can totally buy this version of the Doctor doing it, whereas
Yeah.
whereas that was a problem with Peter Cushing.
And I think what also makes this better is that it's just more concentrated. The movie, even if they're very similar in length, but the movie feels unnecessary in how it approaches the situation. Like you feel like, why are we seeing this like this? Like, why are we seeing it in this way of like, okay, these travelers go to this planet. There are these Daleks there, and then they help out, and then they leave. It feels very counterintuitive, It feels like we have to establish two different concepts, and one of them is drastically more well set up than the other. Like you're watching like a really bad ripoff of H.G. Wells' The Time Traveler with the Daleks from Doctor Who in it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a sense, you're watching a ripoff of Doctor Who with the actual Doctor Who villains in it, I guess is the best way to put it. But in this, we've already, like, the idea of the Doctor is established, everything is already there, so it's just the setup of the Daleks and Skaro. So let me ask you this then as well. Do you think part of the problem with the Thals is that they're a primitive, sort of hunter-gatherer society, so they feel too similar to the cavemen in the last story?
The Thals?
Yeah.
Uh,
They are very different, but civilization-wise, they're not too far off from that. The only difference, I'm saying in terms of their technology, their actual philosophy is obviously very different.
right. Well, the Thals also have they know agriculture. That's very clearly explained. The only
Right,
reason
there's
they're
just
not
nothing growing, yeah.
the only reason they're not off farming right now is because their plateau hasn't had rain in a while. And they've become desperate.
Right.
I don't know. I think they're different enough.
I just think they kind of blend into that. It feels like, well, can we have some variety, please? Do we always have to encounter, like, tribal people? Can't there be, like, I don't know, another slightly less advanced race?
Next time, the Aztecs. Ah,
Fuck!
Doctor Who, you scamp.
You scamp, you. Whether you'd be Peter Cushing or William Hartnell, you're still a scamp either way. Man, if you got them in a room, I think William Hartnell is the only person in the world who could, like, maybe intimidate Peter Cushing. He couldn't do it to Christopher Lee, though. Anyway.
No, nobody intimidates the Prince of Darkness.
So, I thought what I also liked about the relationship between the Daleks and the Thals is that there's all that there's that idea of, that the Thals are sort of like, they're pacifistic to a fault, where they literally don't even have a concept that they can fight for their own survival, you know? They're just so
Yeah.
accepting of their circumstances that the idea that they can resist the Daleks is seen as like a bad idea. Like they see it as like this waste of energy, this waste of time, and there's no need to provoke another war. I just thought that was very interesting, and it was,
Which is seriously annoying. I was getting Gundam Wing flashbacks all throughout watching this, but this stupid bitch in Gundam Wing who was so devoted to her pacifism that she became just completely ineffectual.
right, almost suicidal to a point where it's like, I'm just gonna die because my existence is a hindrance.
Yeah.
You know, that's like, but like they put it in a context where not only does it make sense, but it's interesting to play these people that way.
Yeah. Well, Ian has a line, a very good line in this, where he says, "Pacifism only works when everyone else feels the same way."
Right, exactly. And you know, he's like, if it's sickening to see this lack of fighting for survival. You know, this is the whole point of life. This is why we get up every morning. You know,
Yeah.
to fight for our us and our own. So yeah, no, I think that all works really well. I think, if anything, that the worst part of all this is just when we're going through the caves, and it's just us chilling with the Thals, Ian and Barbara. I think that's the part where it kind of loses me. Like the Doctor and Susan in the Dalek City is all great because the Doctor is not having any of the Dalek shit. He's just like, you guys are fucking ridiculous. Fuck you. And it's great. But I think all the stuff with, because it's like 2 whole episodes, right? Of them crawling around in caves trying to find a way into the Dalek City. And somehow
basically, yeah, all of the 6th episode is about them like crossing the swamp and then going into that cave. And then the 7th episode, like a good portion of it is still them trying to get out of that fucking cave until they get to the...
it feels seriously like padding. It feels like somebody was like, hey, Terry Nation, make 7 episodes. He's like, all right, 2 episodes into cave, bitches.
Yeah, like, I think you could tell this exact same story at the most 5 episodes.
Yeah.
You know, 7
5,
is just too many.
6 at the absolute max. You could, cutting out a full episode probably would have been enough for me.
Absolute minimum 4, but then you might be losing too much. You know?
I think you're losing too much. No, I even think that 6 is, like, 5 might even be too little. I think you need to do 6. Like, that's the proper big event Who episode length, you know?
You could do the entire plot of the 6th episode in the 7th episode, so that's immediately 1 eliminated.
You don't need a whole episode of them crawling around in the cave, and there's that one Thal that backs out and is like, I'm gonna leave, and the other one's like, no, don't. And then he ends up dying.
Maybe we don't have to actually see, you know, our heroes planning their escape from the city. Maybe we just see how they escape and, you know, be kind of thrilled by it, like in a heist movie where you don't know how they're going to do it, but then they do it and you're like, oh, that's genius.
Are you talking about early on, where they plan out putting the cape under the Dalek?
Well, it's like the 3rd or 4th episode when they're still a prisoner, and we see them plan out everything.
Yeah.
And they do it. And I
do like the cut where they pretend to fight, and we don't know that they're pretending to fight until, like, the Doctor and Ian are throwing each other around. Yeah. At least they played that right, but I see what you're saying. But I think it's because of that cut that they had to do it that way.
I think you could just cut down on a lot of that stuff. There are just a ton of little redundancies all throughout that you could easily just rein it in. You know,
I think they were a little presumptuous. I think they knew they had something good this time. They kind of wrung it out to its absolute max.
The first episode is kind of patty, because what happens in that episode? They land on the planet, and they go out, they look around the petrified forest, they find the weird fossilized metal lizard thing, which is really cool looking.
Yeah, that is cool. And that's like a great like use of limitation as well, where we can't have this weird lizard monster, so we'll show the weird looking metal corpse of it, you know?
Yeah. So they're walking around the forest, they're looking around. Somebody sneaks up behind Susan and grabs her shoulder, she freaks out.
That's all. That's really good setup as well. You know,
That's basically the whole episode. Didn't they go into the city and the last?
yeah,
We
you
don't
don't
even
see a Dalek until the second episode.
right. We see the plunger. That's all we see.
Right.
Uh, you could do all of that so much quicker. They wander out into the forest. Somebody grabs Susan. She's freaked out about it. You don't have to go back into the TARDIS and have what's her name consoling Susan over the fact that she's, somebody grabbed her from behind.
Yes, that first bit when they go back in does kind of drag the whole thing out. But I like that we have this instant moment of fear that turns out to be salvation later on, and the Daleks are our real inception of fear. But yeah, it definitely pads things out. The radiation sickness is also very well handled. I mean, they should still be dead, but whatever. It's science fiction, and it's on an alien planet. Who cares? But I like the build of that. How it's like early on they're all like, "Why are we so exhausted?" And then suddenly they're like, "Oh shit, we have radiation sickness."
You know what would have been interesting in like an alternate universe? I'd love to see it like a version of where Terry Nation did this. What if it had turned out that the Thals were actually the bad guys? Because you have these Daleks, and they're all like creepy, and they're like rolling around in tin cans, and they're all mutated and shit. And it's very sad, but also terrifying, you know. But then you run into these people in the forest, and like, oh, they're perfect looking, and they're all blonde, and they
Has Doctor Who ever done a bait and switch like that?
I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure they have.
I'm sure it's probably even happened in New Who, and I'm just having trouble thinking of an example.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking it probably has happened in New, because that seems like a spin that New Who would do on it. You know.
I mean, they kind of did that with the Hath in the Doctor's Daughter episode, but that was more of a blame on both sides thing than it was a like, hey, we're the good guys. Like,
that would have been like that. You know what that's like? That's like the Thals and the Kalex in Genesis, because they're both just at war with each other, and they're both equally to blame. We're only against the Khalids because they're the Daleks, or we know that they will be the side that creates the Daleks.
If you're watching Genesis of the Daleks in 1970, whatever it aired, and you're somebody who's been following the show since it started in '63, you might expect like, they're going to the Thals, finally some good people. And then they get there, and they're just as fucked up as the Khalids in that time period.
Right, exactly. So that absolutely works on that level. However, I think they kind of do a little bit of it as it is, with having Susan be so afraid of them at first, and then they end up trusting each other. I think that all works really well. Like that first bit between Susan and whatever the hell that Thal's name is, Aldon or whatever. I think that works out really well. And it serves to make you go like, oh, okay, they're not just going to constantly be chased. Because that gets exhausting. Especially given the first story where they're constantly being captured. You know?
Oh, yeah.
It's nice that they meet some allies out there. Because prior to this, everybody else is against them.
Right.
So I think that you needed a little bit of that. But maybe it would have been a nice bait and switch to have it be the roly, weird-looking robot things. It's also a good reveal that the Daleks aren't robots, though. Like, there's discussion about it, like, Ian is like, oh, they're machines, and the Doctor is like, oh, no, but what if more terrifyingly they are creatures who feel that that need to drive around in those machines?
Well, Barbara actually suggests the possibility.
Is it Barbara? Okay.
Early on at some point, she's like, what if they're not just machines? What if there's something in there? And Susan actually thinks that's kind of ridiculous. She laughs at it at first. And then they come to find out that's actually what happened. I remember that because it's the rare case of Barbara actually saying or doing something productive.
She's not a dumb, easily led know-it-all in that instance.
Yeah, she actually was just like, hey, what if this is the case? And they were kind of like, oh, that's silly. And then it was like, oh, right on.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Well, all right, D, we're approaching 2 hours, so I think we should start to wrap up. But what else should we say about the first Dalek story? Because I definitely think there are a few stones we left unturned.
I like the irony that happens midway through the serial. This is probably the best reveal in the entire episode.
Oh, yeah.
This was the best like writing moment, the thing that made me go, that's good. So Hartnell lies about the fluid link being broken, and that's the reason. And he uses that as an excuse to get them to go into the city because he wants to explore the city. Then they wind up getting captured by the Daleks. They spend several episodes planning their escape. They get out, and then come to find out, Ian doesn't have the fluid link anymore. The Daleks took it. So now his lie is true. They need to get their fluid link back from the Daleks, and so that's why they wind up leading the Thal sort of war against the Daleks.
I love that as well. That whole bit where the Doctor and Barbara are like, Ian, you have to convince them to fight for us. He's like, I won't do it. I won't ask them to sacrifice themselves for us. And the Doctor's like, you're a fucking idiot. And Barbara's also like, you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah.
I loved all that as well. And I liked the moral ambiguity of they didn't do it to save, like, we're going to help these poor people. Like, no, they needed them, they needed their help in order to reclaim the fluid link.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that was also a solid moment.
There's a TARDIS part I'd like to see come back in New Who in some fashion. Can you imagine if in New Who he's like, I got to replace the fluid link?
Well, imagine he runs out of mercury, because that's the one thing, is like, he seems to not even really need the mercury. I think he says he can replenish it on its own. But it's a mere matter of having the piece.
Yeah.
I think...
They don't do shit like that with the TARDIS anymore, though, man. Nowadays, whenever the TARDIS is having a problem, it's like, the TARDIS has been possessed by a cosmic entity, or, the TARDIS is exploding from the inside, or... something crazy like that. It's never.
It's got to be a big thing, like, or when it accidentally travels to another universe and shuts down, and it has to be rejuvenated.
It's never just like where the way it used to be, where it's just like, TARDIS needs a new transmission.
Right. Well, I mean, for a time he couldn't even fucking use it, so they definitely don't do stuff like that anymore. I mean, in season 10. There was that sort of forced guardianship of the Master he put on himself, where he wasn't going to leave Earth, but he fucking broke it instantly.
I kind of liked the idea, though, of like doing the Pertwee thing again, but having it being self-enforced. That was a neat twist.
I really liked that. I wish. I kind of wish they had stuck with it for a little longer, in order to, like, maybe we don't go to space until like the 5th episode, and it's a big deal,
Because like Pertwee would have like given his left nut throughout most of his era.
Yeah.
To get his TARDIS thing again.
That was the thing. He hated being stuck on Earth, and he hated the limitations of it. Like, that was what's so fun. That's what's so fun about his era, is he's so like he has that superiority thing that Hartnell has, but he's more fun about it.
Well, and he enjoys his work. Like he enjoys like the unit stuff he's doing, but at the same time, it just can't compare to.
He constantly needs to get to Metebelis 3 to get that blue sapphire.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, even like, I feel like he would go back to Hartnell and like kick him in the nuts for being so willy-nilly with the TARDIS, He'd be like, fucking...
That's the idea.
Stop being such a senile old man and learn how to use this fucking thing.
Quit lying about fluid links. I got real problems.
Yeah, we're like, I don't even have this thing anymore. Like, stop it. Don't take it out and bring it with you, you fucking idiot.
Leave the fluid link in the... What are you doing?
Like, bring a fucking container for the mercury. Don't bring the actual...
See, I thought of that while I was watching it, too. I was like...
bring a container. Like, don't bring the actual fluid link, you fucking idiot.
If his lie is we're out of mercury, then why does he bring the part with him? Like,
yeah. Well, because he has to fill it, He thinks he's just going to find, like, a pool of mercury, like, lying around. He can just dip it in, Like a fucking water bottle in a river.
Yeah, because anybody can just walk into a city and just find mercury.
Well, that's what he seems to think. He literally says to them, like, they look like a very scientifically inclined people. They must have some mercury lying around.
Yeah, assuming that there's even any mercury on this planet.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, they luck out.
Probably has its own, like, unique table of, or not table of contents, periodic table. Like, like, what if there's no mercury on this planet? That's totally plausible. Or even, like, very low amounts to where you couldn't even find it.
Well, because they go into one of the labs early on and they see like a thermometer and it's obvious like, okay, we're gonna be good. And in that moment, the doctor reveals that he didn't even need it until it's like a second later when it gets taken.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that as well.
And let's be real, Bill. If you wanted to right now, you could go into Manhattan, right? And if you wanted mercury bad enough, I'm sure you could find it somewhere, right? Like,
presumably, I wouldn't know where to look, but yeah, I mean, presumably I could if I was so inclined.
Just going people on the street, yo, man, you got any mercury?
Hey, man, you got that silver iodine?
Need some mercury, man.
You got that
need to check temperature.
You got that pre-1970 thermometer? I think it was later than that they stopped using mercury. But yeah, don't use mercury in your thermometers, kids. You will get people killed.
Can you imagine the snarky ass responses you would get? Hey man, you got like a mercury thermometer? Yeah, what else do you need? You need some lead paint? Like,
you want some asbestos dust? Like, I got some asbestos here for you.
How about a package of lawn darts?
I got this black mold as well. You want me to put this in your bathroom? Like, anyway, all right. The original designs for the Daleks, they're so iconic. Like, you don't even really notice that they're different, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because
I think the laser is the big thing that it's like, oh, this is 1963. They couldn't do a laser on TV, so it's just the thing opens up, and then
people die.
There's people die, and there's a light. There's no indication that there's a beam or anything.
Yeah,
and I've always thought the new Who effect was problematic. It was too Mars attacks. I'm glad they changed it in Moffat's era, where they didn't do the whole you see the skeleton thing, because that was always fucking ridiculous.
Oh, but that goes back to classic Who. I mean,
you don't see the skeleton though.
There's always some kind of like weird effect, that happens.
The weird effect is fine. It's they take it too far though, where it looks like Mars attacks at some point in Davies' run. Anyway.
Yeah, I think they look pretty good. I mean, it's so weird to talk about because it's the prototypical like Dalek design. Even if you've never seen this version of them before, you feel like you have because they show up in the episode and they're just instantly recognizable.
Yeah, definitely. One other thing.
I think the amount of things they were able to do with them is very impressive, especially for 1963 television budget.
And especially since they only had 4 of them. They make it feel like there's a city of these things.
On a show where they weren't supposed to have bug-eyed monsters,
Right, and they immediately decided they were going to have bug-eyed monsters.
I feel like there were more Daleks than 4 in that one shot. I wonder how they, like when they're about to ambush the Thals. Like maybe I'm just remembering it wrong.
Some of them might not have been suits. They could have just been like empty shells without the proper things inside to make them move.
What I'm thinking is like either there's some really clever cutting going on to make it seem like there's more than 4, or like maybe there's some mirrors or something, or maybe they only did show 4 and it just felt like more to me. I don't know.
Because that was one obvious effect when you see the hallways of the Dalek city, because they want you to think it's really vast, so they just like reflected the background. It's really obvious. Like you see good versions of that effect in like Aliens when you see all the hypersleep pods. Like that's a mirror. But this, like, they didn't make that work in this bit.
No. The helicopter math does not make sense, so to speak.
No, the helicopter math doesn't line up. I hope Jordan Vaught Roberts doesn't listen to this. he's gonna go on a comment tirade. No. So
sick of the internet people. Talk about the helicopter.
And I'm just like, me too, Jordan, me too.
He's turning into Sam Jackson, but not even from his movie. He's like, I'm tired of these motherfuckers.
He's turning into Sam Jackson from Unbreakable. Anyway.
I want Sam Jackson to find an excuse to recycle lines from previous movies now in like everything. Because when he said, hold on to your butts.
Yeah, that was awesome. It's a great reference. Hey, Dylan, did you know that you and I like Kong Skull Island?
Yeah, that is a thing that I'm aware of.
So, the Daleks, though. Is there anything else you want to say? I think the way they beat them is way too vague. Like, I couldn't even describe it to you. Some of them blow up. That's what I remember.
They run in, and I guess they took them by surprise.
What
I
did
don't know,
they
it's
do to make them blow up?
It kind of just fizzles out, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then they're in the woods, and it's like, we're leaving now. Woo!
We watched that scene a couple times, and I'm still not entirely sure how exactly they beat them.
And it's problematic because the Doctor...
It was a big deal. It was a big deal when they were in the cave in the episode previous, because there was this one Thal, I like to call him Hudson, because the whole time he was like, we're screwed, man, game over.
Yeah,
and then then they get to Dalek City, and it seems like really easy.
Yeah. Well, because the problem with a lot of Doctor Who is that the Doctor relies on his enemy being an idiot in order for him to win, you know? Because he's not super actiony, he can't just punch someone and then that's how he'll solve the issue. He always has to rely on the fact of well, the Sontaran technology doesn't work this way, so they have this one flaw that I will manipulate, you know? There's never a time where he's like, no, they're exactly on my level. I'm just gonna have to beat the shit out of them until they stop. You know? And it's fun when they do get him to that place. They're in the Seeds of Doom and Baker's era, there's one point where he's just running around with a gun, just waving it at people, I will shoot you if you don't listen to me.
Well, that's what's fun about the Master, is it's a villain that's actually on his level, so he has to work a little harder, you know?
Yeah, have you ever seen The Deadly Assassin?
Not in full yet.
That's a really, really good one. And that's probably the best on Gallifrey Doctor story I've seen. That's the only time where I've seen it and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm satisfied with this interpretation of the Time Lords, you know?
Yeah.
Every other time I knock my head against a wall trying to figure out how their society works.
From what I understand, War Games is supposed to be really fucking good.
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for that. So anyway, all in all, I find it interesting that you think you might like the first story in these two better simply because it's better paced. Because I just think conceptually, again, the Daleks just overwhelms it. You know, again, I think the best of all of this is the pilot, is An Unearthly Child. I think that's the best of all of it.
I think what it comes down to is two factors. The caveman story is a much easier maybe not more entertaining, but it's a much easier.
It's a breezier watch.
Yeah, because of the pacing. And again, I haven't criticized it for being a little clunky in places, but by comparison, it's a much easier sit.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Dalek one is
I don't know. Yeah.
The Dalek one is just overly long, and then the other problem is that all of the mythology, the stuff that makes the Dalek episode really interesting, got retconned later on, and now there's a much better version.
Not all of it, but
there's a much better version of that mythology now that exists.
Right.
And so if I want that, I'll just go watch Genesis of the Daleks again. You know, I'll watch that.
Well, the novelty here is the reveal of it. You know,
right?
And the status quo of Skaro is obviously different than in Genesis, and I think it's worth going back to for that. And I'll definitely go back to this before I'll go back to the Peter Cushing movie. And I think that's another big plus. However, it's just it's more involved, and that's really the thing that makes it a bit more difficult to go back to, I think, than some of the other classic Who episodes.
I don't even know if I would say for sure that I like the caveman story more than this one. I'm kind of, you know, I'm kind of going back and forth a little.
Well, but I think they just both have different strengths and weaknesses.
But what I definitely can say is that I think the caveman story, what shocked me about comparing the two of them is that it actually wound up being a little stronger just because of the whole pacing thing.
Right.
It's just tighter. You know, it's more consistent.
Right. Well, I think I liked that one a million times better than I expected to, and the Daleks one had more problems than I remembered. I think is the way it breaks down.
Yeah. I think that's where I'm at too.
Yeah.
That's why I went into this thinking like, oh, the caveman one's kind of like, kind
We'll
of boring,
get
but
through that one and then get to the Daleks, but
yeah, that's what I was expecting.
yeah. Yeah,
That-
no, it wasn't
That's
really
why,
like that for me either.
because that's how I felt about these episodes in hindsight. I've only watched them once before this when I got the DVD, so that's how I kind of felt about them in hindsight. But then going back to them this time, I was just really surprised by how strong that first four-parter was. And then when I got into the Dalek stuff, I was like, this is like a whole day. Like this is just like
Right.
I got to pour a whole day of my life into watching this because it's so long, and it's the kind of thing where I would like take breaks in between episodes because it was just so much.
There's a lot
It's
going
just
on. It's heavy. Yeah.
it's incredibly dense,
Yeah.
And again, they do that perfectly well in Genesis and like some other classic Who episodes. They managed to pull that off, but here it's just a lot, man.
I broke it up into 2 nights myself. I did like 2 episodes. I did the whole Unearthly Child 4-parter, then like 2 episodes of the Dalek stuff, and then I watched the rest of the Dalek stuff the next night, and that worked
Honestly,
out pretty well.
part of the reason we're not recording this on Tuesday, part of the reason that it took me so long to rewatch these is that I was dreading the caveman episode way more than I should have in
Right.
hindsight.
Yeah.
I finally got around to watching that yesterday, and I was like, oh, that was actually pretty. That was a lot better than I remember it. And then today, I'm just like slogging through the Daleks.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's very interesting. But all in all, I was just surprised how much these do hold up in general. How much Hartnell's performance holds up, how much the writing holds up, how much the companions hold up. Just everything still works. It's not perfect, but it still works. And I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, if you're...
Easy to see why the series survived
Oh, yeah.
past
Yeah.
past stories and into the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it's managed to keep itself going for 50 plus years now, and that's great. But if these first couple ones had fell on their face, then it very well could have not happened. Probably if the Daleks hadn't have come out, like them as characters, not the episodes themselves, hadn't come out as iconic and wonderful, the series probably wouldn't be around anymore. Because like I
Yeah.
said, that was the first big break.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was a show that ran into early issues because their first episode nobody watched because it happened. They happened to air it the night the news broke about the Kennedy assassination,
Yep.
and then they had to like beg the studio to air it again the next night, which is not something that was done.
Right.
Reruns not really a thing, and so I mean, famously difficult beginnings, and then the Daleks are what kind of made it a staple.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, it shows you that the beauty of this character is that he is inherently interesting, but he has to be put in interesting situations, otherwise he doesn't feel like he even needs to be there. Like, that's part of the problem with some First Doctor stories, is that he just feels like he's kind of a non-entity because he just refuses to get involved, you know?
Right. Well, and then he'll try, and sometimes then he winds up being ineffectual. Like, I'm sorry, the current Dalek, current Doctor, Capaldi Doctor, who is still the current Doctor until Christmas, he's not going to get snuck up on behind and knocked out by a caveman.
No,
That's
he
not
would
gonna
he would sense it from like a million miles away, and if he even let them get close, it would be because he let them. Like, that's
Yeah,
the
then
Doctor we're dealing with now, you know?
Yeah.
Like, this
And
is,
he'd use some-
again, this is pre-regeneration. He's still like, he's just a dittering old man.
Yeah.
What's also super vague throughout all of Doctor Who is how
really
old he was when he started. Because in this stuff, I would assume he started long before he even took Susan with him. But obviously, when you get to, like, Name of the Doctor, it looks like Hartnell when he steals the thing, and Susan's with him.
Yeah.
So he obviously didn't steal it that long before An Unearthly Child.
Well, I mean, after he stole the TARDIS, he was basically a fugitive for a while. So if you think about it, he wouldn't probably have been able to go back to his planet to get Susan. So he must have had Susan when he stole the TARDIS.
I always liked the idea of him going off though, because there's that line in season 4 where he talks about the Medusa Cascade. He's like, oh, and I was so young at 90 coming here, you know, and I'm like, did he look like Hartnell then, like? Or like, is that what he's talking about, or was he still like kind of a young Time Lord, and this was when Hartnell was still young?
I don't think he looked like Hartnell because they definitely age slowly. Because I mean, there'll be episodes where Matt Smith shows up and he's like, "Hey, it's been 300 years since I saw you last," or something. You know?
But then suddenly he's aging on Trenzalore. Yeah.
Right. Well, because he was there for a long ass amount of time, and I imagine that snowy, icy planet had a similar effect on him that the twin sons of Tatooine had on Obi-Wan Kenobi.
That's true. And also he's like fighting a war too, so
that'll do it. I mean, we can't even like have a president stay young like over the course of like imagine being in charge of a planet that's being attacked by like every other thing in the universe.
Right.
No, but yeah, the other interesting
I need
thing...
to rewatch Time of the Doctor before I see Capaldi's last Christmas special, because I have a lot of mixed feelings about it.
The other interesting thing that you get when you go back and watch these old episodes is like, because everything is so prototypical at this stage in the game, because there's so much that isn't established yet in these early episodes, it really makes you wonder like what the show could have turned into if like, a different writer had done something, like in an alternate universe, we might not have ever gotten regenerations or found out that they were called Time Lords. They could have been called something else, It's just,
could have
it's
been called
infinite.
Flimble Dangles.
Doctor Who is a show all about infinite possibilities, and this is the point when the possibilities were the most infinite, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it feels very, it like going back to it now, it still feels so fresh.
Because there's no lore.
Right.
There's tying you down. There's no like, oh well, he can't do that because the fucking time lock.
Right.
Or whatever.
I think that's why I like Classic Who so much now, because it doesn't feel as restricted as a lot of new Who does by the status quo. Because there was no status quo, or if there was one, they didn't really care so much about it. It was more about the individual serials. But New Who is so caught up in its own continuity and its own existence that it's more a slave to its own setup.
Well, look at how during the Fifth Doctor's run they just snuck the death of Adric into the end of a Cyberman episode. Like you watch Earthshock, and it's just a Cyberman episode, and it's not until the very end that like the possibility of one of them dying even happens, and then it just happens, and then it's over with, and the kid's dead. There's none of this like bullshit that Moffat would have done.
It's not like the Doctor is like mourning him for an entire season, or there's an entire Christmas special where he's sitting sad up in a cloud.
Right. He's in a ship. It crashes into the Earth. Spoilers: the dinosaurs go extinct, and then that's the thing, and it just happens, and then it's over. It's great.
I will have to get there. But all right, Dean, I think we've said everything about these first two Hartnell stories that we're going to say. Fucking awesome, interesting conversation, though. I'm really glad we finally have sat down and talked about these early First Doctor stories, because, again, it's untouched ground with us, so it's nice to finally just be able to dig in. But
yeah, I'd love to talk some more Classic Who on this show. The only problem is...
we will be, sir, trust me.
The only problem is I don't know how frequently we'll be able to do it, because again, I don't have access to most of them.
Right. I want to do Troughton. I want to do Troughton next. So obviously we'll have to do a story of his that's worth discussing, or a story or two, and also is one that you can get, because whatever it is, as long as it's not lost, I'm pretty sure I can get it.
Right. Well, one Troughton story that I've seen before, and I'd have to look around online to see if I could find it anywhere in the International Space Satellite or whatever, is The Mind Robber. That's a really interesting episode.
That was the one that was on Netflix. I never finished it. Yeah.
But if I can't find that, we could do that Dalek one that recently got animated, because I do know of a place where I can watch that right now, and that is one that I've been wanting to check out, because it's an episode that's been lost.
The Daleks Master Plan, it's called?
No, that's the one that's still lost. The one they recently animated is called Power of the Daleks, I think.
Okay, yep, all right. I've heard of this one then. Yeah, I'm totally down for that. We'll have to. I mean, we're not going to do that next week, obviously. Whenever we come back to Classic Who, we'll do either that or the Mind Robber. But I'm down for that, totally.
Right.
Either that or the Yeti one. The Yeti story is also very iconic. I think that's also the first one with the Brigadier. I could be wrong. No. The first Brigadier story is the Cyberman invasion of Earth.
Yeah.
Which maybe we should also do. If you can get access to any and all of these, we'll have to decide. But see, it's not going to be a problem for me. It's going to be a problem for you.
Right. I just gotta I gotta find a person who has access to them. Mm-hmm. Kill him.
Because that's a crucial element.
And then just take all his shit.
Right. You just steal all his other shit if you forget about the Doctor Who. But, it happens. Next week, though, we will not be doing more Classic Who. We're going to go back to another... I mean, this is like the base route for us. So, Dylan, what are we going to be discussing next time?
Right. Well, we've been doing these commentary series recently, and one that is obvious for us to do is Godzilla, but we don't really want to do those like one after the other the way we've been doing these other commentary series, because first, there's a lot of them, but also, Bill's already done like Godzilla Palooza, and it would just feel like doing that again, but in a different style. So we're just going to do them randomly on this channel. We've really already done it before because we did our Megalon commentary, which I thought was a lot of fun back in the day.
We've already started.
So we're just going to occasionally pick a Godzilla movie out of the blue and do a commentary on it for DFS. Currently, our plan is we want to do 84 next week. It'll depend on if we can figure out the technical side of that, which I'm pretty sure we will be able to.
Whatever we have to do, we can make it work. It's just a matter of the best way to do it, because you and I have it via different medium, so we'll just have to figure it out.
Worst case scenario, we save it for later and pick a different Godzilla movie. But the point is, Godzilla
we could
commentary...
act it out with sock puppets. We've seen it enough times. It'll be great.
We could. I don't think I've seen it as many times as you had, but I'll hang in there.
I could do the American version. I could not do the Japanese version, but I could do the American version with sock puppets.
Yeah, that was a late one for me. But anyway,
have you even seen the American version of 84?
Yeah, I saw the American version first. Actually, I got a VHS.
Not young though, right?
Yeah, not young, but I saw it before I saw the Japanese version.
Okay.
I found a VHS of 85 at like a consignment store or something.
Okay, I see.
Bought it and watched it, and then later on, when I got my totally legal copy of both versions, I finally got to see the Japanese version.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, 84 was like my third one, and then I didn't see the Japanese version until like the first time I saw 84 in Japanese was for Godzilla Palooza.
Interesting. See, the order that we saw the Godzilla films is really opposite. It's interesting because like all of your first ones are ones that were later on for me. Like you're always talking about, I was like 5 and I saw like KKVG or Biollante or 84.
All those were when I was 3, child.
And then I'm like, those were like the last ones that I knocked off the list when I was seeing them all.
One that has to be around the same time for us is Godzilla 2000, though, because I mean that came out when we were alive. So
yeah, I actually remember going to the theater for that. So that
same. So that's one that would have been the same exposure.
Yeah, point is, Godzilla commentaries occasionally on DFOS. Look forward to that. And then the week after that, we're going to do a science episode. And then should we tell them what we're planning?
We'll tell them the plan then. So for the entire, I mean, we've already announced, I'm pretty sure, commentaries of the night, our upcoming commentary series that'll be about the original Universal classic monster films, all the original solo adventures of those classic monsters we all know and love and see on mass merchandising pieces of American capitalism around Halloween. So we're going to be doing commentaries on those. That'll be the week building up to Halloween.
Be on the lookout for a trailer for that at some point in the near future too. Yeah. And by trailer, the intro.
The intro, but with a date at the end of it.
Yeah.
So look out for that coming soon. And in addition to that, we're going to do sort of a companion but different theme for that on DFOS, where we're going to sort of do like a grab bag of different horror and monster stuff that is very connected to Halloween, but isn't connected to each other. So we're just going to sort of do a grab bag of sort of individual franchises and films that we have been meaning to discuss together, but we haven't done before. So
basically,
we'll sort of announce those one after the other, but that's the plan.
Yeah. Basically, for the entire month of October, DFOS is doing an all horror movie review slate. The horror genre is just going to take the channel over for a while. I mean, we're all big fans of Halloween over here. Fun fact: recorded the first episode of this podcast on Halloween one year.
We did indeed. Yep.
So we're going to be all over that this year.
We are
in a big way.
In a big bad way. So look out for that.
There's a concession prize for not getting G-Fest material from us.
Yeah, exactly. It's just we didn't take a hiatus, and it's a million commentaries and podcasts. So we hope you're enjoying, because we're not going to let up anytime soon. So look out for all of that and many more in the future. But that is all for this week's episode of Demons from Outer Space. Until then, I am Bill Worcester, a.k.a. Zazubaar.
And I'm Super DM64.
Reminding you that you can't see us because it's a podcast, Colonel Hogan.